Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church and our ongoing study in the Guide to Eastern Orthodox Theology by Dr. E. Tibbs from Fuller Theological Seminary. We're going to look at pages 67 to 88. We're going to look at a few more pages than normal. Let's go to block 1. And under the ordination of women, men and women are equally the image of God, and there are many female saints, but there have never been female priests or female bishops. But there have been, and there can continue to be, female deacons, and they assist with reading of the gospel during worship and in the distribution of the Eucharist. Now, apostolic succession is the historical transmission of faith. The faith of the apostles must be maintained without addition, without subtraction. The apostles were the first episkopoi, and each second-generation bishop was ordained by the laying on of hands. See 1 Timothy 4:14. Do not neglect the gift given you with the laying on of hands. Now, block 1, note 3, follow the bishop to avoid error in transmission. St. Ignatius was the third bishop of Antioch. First was Simon Peter, then Evodius, and then Ignatius. Ignatius was the third bishop of Antioch in the 2nd century. And false teaching and heresy was emerging in the 2nd century. He initiated the imperative to follow the bishop in order to avoid the transmission of error concerning the gospel. And that leads us into block 2, and we want to take a look at apostolic Christology, because early heresy had a great deal to do with the person of Christ. Who was the person of Christ? Who was Jesus Christ? So block 2. Block 2, note 1, the Word of God. The Word of God is the person of Jesus Christ, and he abides in the church. He is the incarnate Logos. And I would add to that, based on John chapter 6, he is the incarnate Rhema. Remember, John said he is the Rhema, the spoken word. So he is the Rhema, the spoken word of God. Now, the author refers us to John 1:1, but also 1 John 1:1 and 2, where Christ was encountered with all the human senses. Remember, John says, we witnessed his incarnation. We testify to the incarnate Christ. Who do people say I am? Matthew 16:13 through 16. Who do people say that the Son of Man is? According to the Orthodox faith, he is fully God and fully man. And by the way, that is also what the Protestant faith affirms as well. He is fully God and fully man. 1 John 2:22 and 23. Who is the liar but he who denies that Jesus is the Christ? The full divinity and full humanity of Christ is the established truth of Eastern Orthodoxy, which was affirmed in the ancient ecumenical councils. And I agree with that completely. Now, early heresy. Here we go. The Docetists, from dokeo, to seem. It describes the Gnostics. They said Christ was divine, but only appeared to be human, because all true reality is invisible. They denied the humanity of Christ. And then the Ebionites, Jewish followers of Christ, said he was a mere mortal who was adopted into the Godhead at his baptism. They denied the deity of Christ. Now today we have heresies that actually align with those early heresies. New Age Gnostics today deny Christ's humanity. Jehovah's Witnesses deny Christ's divinity. So there are current heresies in our 21st century that correspond with the early heresy of the Gnostics and the Ebionites. And that was who was trying to infiltrate the church, primarily the Gnostics. The Gnostics were trying to infiltrate the church in Asia Minor. The Apostle John had to deal very directly with the Gnostics. 1 John is all about that. In fact, all of the letters of the Apostle John are a challenge against Gnosticism that was infiltrating the churches in Asia Minor, the Apostle John's churches, over which he was an overseer. So in the 2nd century, actually at the end of the 1st century and then into the beginning of the 2nd century, Gnosticism had become a very prevalent heresy to be challenged. Let's go on to block 3 and take a look at maintaining apostolic truth. Okay. Apostolic truth. How did the faithful identify the wolves of John 10:12? How was the unity of doctrine maintained? In the 2nd century, the Bishop of Lyons, Irenaeus, wrote the manuscript against heresies. He primarily was speaking out against Gnosticism because they were adapting Christ's teachings to their opinions about a higher gnosis. And so Irenaeus wrote against heresies to challenge Gnosticism. Now, reciting the creeds as oral tradition. We never think about this, but we should think about it. What exactly was the oral tradition? And the author addresses that, and I'm very glad that Professor Tibbs did do that. The way of the apostles was fought for in the communion of the church, in the koinonia of the church, maintaining the rule of truth. Here you go. Creeds were often recited during worship, and they were recited at baptism. So the creed was recited by the congregation. And we talk about, at least our church does, our Southern Baptist Church does, we talk about, how can we replicate the early Christian church? Well, we can replicate it by being involved in mission. That is certainly true. But also, we could take a step toward replicating the early church by reciting the creed in our church, by reciting the Apostolic Creed. We have a huge projection screen. We have all the digital benefits of this century, and we have a huge projection screen. We could project the Apostolic Creed on the screen, and we could recite that together as a congregation as part of our worship, and we really would be then replicating what the early church did, because that's how the truth, the apostolic truth, was preserved, by reciting the creeds during worship, reciting the creeds during baptism, and then it became reinforced over and over and over again, and it became more deeply imprinted in each member's heart. So I am all for going back to that practice. I think that is would be a noble practice to re-implement in the church. And it could be easily done in today's digital age. We could project the creed on the huge screen that we have, and the congregation could read and recite the Apostolic Creed together as koinonia, fellowship, and worship. Now, block 3, note 3, error versus heresy. Not every wrong teaching is at the level of heresy, but there is a non-negotiable truth, and the Orthodox faith practices apophatic theology through negation when it concerns the essence of God's nature, and that is beyond human language. So a definitive conceptual conclusion, they are open to discussion and debate to reach a common communal decision concerning doctrine. Let's go back through and do a quick recap, because this is an extremely important lesson on apostolic succession, because it's about the apostolic faith that is preserved. So block 1, note 2. Apostolic succession is not the succession of bishops. It is the succession of the historical transmission of faith. The historical transmission of faith, the faith of the apostles, must be maintained without addition, without subtraction, because the apostles were the first episcopoi, the first bishops, and each second-generation bishop was ordained by the laying on of hands. 1 Timothy 4:14, do not neglect the gift given you with the laying on of hands. And the Apostle John practiced the laying on of hands when he anointed the 7 bishops in the 7 major churches in Asia Minor, over which he was the overseer. So the Apostle John also, like Paul, continued that same practice. Now block 2, Christology. And it's got to be a note 2, Matthew 16:13 through 16. Who do the people say that the Son of Man is? He is fully God and fully man. And then we read in 1 John 2:22 to 23, who is the liar but he who denies that Jesus is the Christ? The full divinity and the full humanity of Christ is the established truth of Eastern Orthodoxy, and I can tell you right now it's the established truth of the Southern Baptist Convention, and I'm sure it's the established truth of the Catholic Church, and it was affirmed by the ancient ecumenical councils. That is a non-negotiable truth. Jesus Christ, we must affirm his full divinity and his full humanity. Period. No compromise. No qualification. No adding to. No subtracting from. Christ, we must affirm his full divinity and his full humanity. Son of God and Son of Man. Now block 3 for our recap. I'm going to go to note 2 because I kind of want the church to take this up again. Reciting the creeds during worship, that was oral tradition. The way of the apostles was fought for in the koinonia communion of the church to maintain the rule of truth. Creeds were recited during worship. Creeds were recited during baptism. And doctrine met 3 criteria. They had to maintain the rule of truth. They had to be shared by the communal liturgy of worship in alignment with the communal interpretation, and comply with the assertion that Christ is the truth. The truth is a person. We know that. Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. That is a non-negotiable, fundamental truth that cannot be compromised. Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life, period. Certain truths cannot be qualified. We affirm that Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. We affirm that Christ is fully God and fully man, Son of God, Son of man. Fundamental truths like those cannot be qualified, cannot be compromised, period. They cannot be compromised. That gives us a great lesson on apostolic succession, which is the historical transmission of the faith. That's going to wrap up pages 67 to 88. The next lesson will go page 88 to 98. We'll drop back into just 10 pages next time. So that's going to wrap up 67 to 88 on apostolic succession.